Hello and welcome to another episode of Earth911's Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation with a changemaker working to accelerate the transition to a sustainable, carbon-neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Much of the waste in our world is the result of overstocking and excess inventory in business and government. As much as $600 billion in surplus goods are lying unused in some of the largest organizations in the world, including universities, hospitals, and industries that span the planet, like construction and heavy manufacturing. Rheaply.com, that's spelled Rheaply. Rheaply.com is an emerging resource reuse market. All right, here we go. Rheaply.com, which is spelled Rheaply. Rheaply.com is an emerging resource reuse marketplace platform aimed at solving the problem by enabling the transfer of resources to where they can be used. We're joined today by Garry Cooper Jr., co-founder and CEO of Rheaply. Garry is an accomplished investor at Longjump Ventures, and he's been recognized as an innovator by Forbes, Chicago Business Magazine, and Crain. He's also on the faculty of Northwestern University, where he earned a PhD in neuroscience. The company recently closed a $20 million round of funding that includes investors like Salesforce, Microsoft, and AOL founder Steve Case's Rise of the Rest seed fund, which brings the total raised to date to $21 million. The Rheaply platform is a bit like eBay, but focused on creating regional circular economies. It allows purchasing and other managers to list supplies, equipment, materials, and other surplus or unneeded assets for sale, then track and connect them to potential buyers to close a sale and arrange for delivery. By bringing together large commercial buyers with suppliers within a region, Rheaply reduces the emissions associated with shipping something halfway around the world. If it's available locally, the price and environmental impact are much lower. Additionally, the platform can help people inside large organizations exchange assets and supplies instead of disposing of them on a surplus site. And Rheaply does provide an embodied carbon tracker that reports on the emissions avoided by choosing items listed in the marketplace. There's a lot to this story, so let's dig into the details with Garry. You can learn more about Rheaply at Rheaply.com. Again, that's spelled Rheaply, Rheaply.com. Welcome to the show, Garry. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you?
Doing well. I want to start off with a kind of a background question because we don't talk to that many people with a recently minted PhD in neuroscience who weren't into doing logistics. So you literally started this business with a cart and your sweat equity. Tell us the story about how you founded Rheaply back in 2015.
Yeah, it's still a story that my mother gets a good laugh at around the kitchen table. I was working on trying to find a cure for Parkinson's disease at Northwestern, doing some work on my doctorate, and I happened to be in the largest laboratory at Northwestern at the medical school. And what that meant is we had a lot of stuff. We had a lot of chemicals, a lot of equipment, and honestly, most of that stuff we actually didn't use. We would buy it for testing purposes to see what worked, what didn't work. I would go to lunch with my friends, other graduate students who had other labs that were way smaller than our laboratory. And we would be at lunch, and they would say things like, man, if I only had this, if I only had that, I could do these experiments. And I would sit there and think, oh, we have those things, and we're not even using them. They're in the refrigerator, they're in the back room, they're in a drawer, out of sight, out of mind. And so one day I decided to go to my PI, my principal investigator, the head of the lab, and just say, hey, what if we just shared the stuff that we're not using anymore with other labs on our floor? Mm-hmm. He was like, I almost remember him writing something pretty dismissively and just looking up and going, okay, whatever, And so I went and got a cart, and I piled the things that we were no longer using in the laboratory on this cart, and I would push it around the floor that we were on at Northwestern and just redistribute to other labs. Once a month I'd come by and say, hey, does anyone want to use this? Can someone use that? People actually loved it. And so much so that when I left Northwestern and went into kind of supply chain work at Ernst & Young, I would still get emails from people at the university 2-3 years later, like, hey, Garry, where's the cart? Where's the cart? And I would respond, sometimes I would respond, I'd say, I don't know where the cart is. I haven't been there for 3 years. And then one night I thought, wow, there needs to be a solution beyond the cart that doesn't have a single point of failure like me. And so that kind of got me thinking about building technology to kind of replace that cart.
Now, what was the catalyst? You have done some entrepreneurial work, but making the jump into starting a logistics company in a marketplace is quite a leap. What was the transformative moment for you?
I think it was, I never, ever thought about starting a startup. Never mind starting a startup in this space. Again, I've been a lab rat. So I've been in a lab for 15 years, either in the cancer field or in the Parkinson's field my whole life. So if I were to do something in the business world, it would definitely be kind of in the biomedical world if I were to do anything. So I really never envisioned it. It literally was as pure and honest as my best friend, one at a bar. I think most things happen at a bar, right? Yeah. And I got one of these emails from Northwestern saying, "Hey, Gary, where's the cart?" And on my phone, and I looked at my phone because I was a visiting scholar at Northwestern, so I still had access to my email. So I looked at it, and we're having a drink, and I showed it to him. And I said, "Man, we should build out some technology to replace this cart. People could use it." Now, his background was completely in technology. So he had been a front-end developer at a lot of Chicago tech companies for about 12 years. And me and him had wanted to start something together. So that was something as best friends that we had been kind of trying to find something to work on. But honestly, man, over the 10 years that we've been friends, I must have pitched him 90 times on ideas, and 90 of them he hated. And he would tell me so. And this one, I specifically remember him saying, "Not bad," after I told him about the idea. And for me, that was some sense of validation. So really, it was like, I think the problem is tractable. I think the solution that can be built, I have a friend and a friend of his who can help me build it. And I really, at the time, I wasn't thinking of the built environment. I wasn't thinking of kind of the other things that Rheaply is involved in today. I was thinking about how can we get more research done with less dollars? How can we get more research done with less waste? Because both those things help turn out more cures, more treatment for patients. So really, I was just thinking, well, if we can start something, maybe it's just a freemium thing, maybe that might mean something in the long end. And so really, I didn't have kind of a grandiose vision of what Rheaply would become. I just was trying to put out a solution beyond the cart with a friend of mine.
Now, we know that there's about $600 billion in just unused stuff lying around within corporate and government entities. What's being bought and sold on Rheaply, and who's using it?
Yeah, so Rheaply, so obviously we got our start in the laboratory. So our product and the things that are our platform are things that you would find in a lab. I would say, whether it be a chair, whether it be a desk, then all the way to chemicals and biologics and equipment. And I would say that was true until the pandemic. And then in the pandemic, what we started to see, and even to now, that a lot of organizations are rethinking their physical footprint, right? So they are decommissioning sites. They are reducing their corporate headquarters, either footprint or altogether. They're re-engineering spaces that they continue to have. So they're not just offices, they're flex spaces, they're event spaces. So with all that, what ends up happening, at least in our hands, we see a lot of movement of physical assets in what we call the workplace resource category. So whether it be desks and chairs, whether it be fixtures, whether it be new pieces of equipment, replacing old pieces of equipment, from a building infrastructure perspective, especially as a lot of buildings go to net zero. So that has just caused us to really focus in over the last, I'd say, 2.5, 3 years, really on the FF&E, fixtures, furniture, and equipment space. So most of the things on Rheaply's platform today are either fixtures, furniture, and equipment. But, that's not to say that we don't still have a strong amount of things from the lab.
Well, a lot of companies just look at that stuff as sunk cost. It's lost. And
exactly.
Pay somebody to take it out of there. how do you change their thinking about the fact that they've got value lying around?
Yeah, so one of the things that I think has been most helpful for us is actually the the impending movement around ESG. But uh, I think everyone's goal to reach at least net zero, if not get beyond zero. And so I think as we've turned it from, yes, you might think they're small dollar valued assets, or they might not be on your books, or quote, who cares? Well, it turns out, as your audience probably already knows, that 11% of the global greenhouse gas emissions comes from the manufacturing of things in the built environment, these same assets. So there's just no way that any business, notwithstanding carbon credit purchasing, which has its own, let's just say its own treatment, no business can no business can get to net zero or claim to if they're not thinking about their built environment, and how to handle that. So I think what we've tried to do is turn the value argument not on like ROI, not on what you purchased it for, but on what's its impact to the planet. Because at the very, very end of the day, we don't have a market if we don't have a planet.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, and so I think so, and I think that actually a lot. I know a lot of folks in kind of this space now, in the sustainability and the climate tech space, in particular the circular economy space. And one of the things that we kind of try to think about is our business cases aren't to how much money can I save this quarter or this month. The business case should be how can I create a community and an environment in which my business can thrive.
Well, and so creating that community and environment within Rheaply, one of the things you're doing is you provide some estimated embodied carbon emissions data that they can use to say, this is what we're going to have. How do you actually come to those estimates? That must require some profiling of either types of equipment or specific products.
Yes, exactly. So we partner with a couple of sustainability consulting firms who do a lot of LCAs, so life cycle assessments, on the exact same products that we are kind of helping organizations reuse through our platform. And so basically, when you go into the platform and you put on, let's say, a chair, and one of your employees at your organizations takes that chair in reuse as opposed to buying a new chair, we can specifically calculate like how much embodied carbon, so that the carbon that was embodied in the manufacturing and the shipment of that item was saved or avoided because you didn't purchase a similar looking chair. And so we can aggregate that across a category like furniture for chairs, and then we can aggregate that across all of your reuse program. And so then what we can really get to as a slice of the Scope 3 portion of a company's global greenhouse gas emissions risk, we can kind of tell them in the embodied carbon sector, the built environment, about how much you can save with reuse and how much you save year to day. And then we're currently working on expanding the amount of LCAs and the amount of data on the back end, so that one day every single material on Rheaply's platform will have some at least estimate, if not actual kind of carbon factor, that we can be able to kind of weigh these things.
And are customers interested in using that data as part of their ESG reporting? Is that, or even estimating
their overall? They are. We're moving a little slow because obviously the ESG field is a little beyond, quite frankly, it's beyond in marketing where it is in actuality and substance. So, what to measure, what are the standards, who arbitrates, who does the auditing, what are the audit credentials? And by the way, there isn't a library of data, carbon data around even just things in the built environment, especially down to the product level, SKU level from a certain, if I have, and I said a chair, but if I have a chair from Steelcase and I have a chair from Herman Miller, there might be different carbon factors involved in those two. There definitely are, right? So I think this space is still young to, download our report and put into an ESG kind of summary. But again, what does an ESG summary look like? I know there are 4 different standards, but until the SEC weighs in, I think, I think there's a little bit of I think people are still kind of wondering. So what we've been trying to help our customers with is like, don't think about reporting.
Right.
Think about solving the problem. Mm-hmm. Because if your estimated embodied carbon is X today, it has to be X minus something tomorrow and X minus something next week. It can't be X plus something tomorrow. So we just need to be directionally, even if, plus or minus, the variation of the actual recording of how much you actually removed is off a couple basis points or so. That's one issue that we can solve with cleaner and better data and better standards. But the question is, are we reducing our exposure or are we increasing our exposure? And at least our tool helps our organization be able to do that.
Now, I absolutely agree that we're going to need to profile everything in the long run. And
yes,
that's a long process. But one of the things that a marketplace has to do is make people comfortable with the transactions. Do you vet participants in the marketplace to say, yeah, they really are with this organization? You can trust them?
That's right. And especially as we look at the Twitter blue check and all these things, I know trust is kind of on everyone's mind. So the one thing I can say that we've always enjoyed as Rheaply is one of our kind of hidden benefits is that really everyone on Rheaply's platform has some type of agreement with us, right? So, whether that be what we call a prime customer, where we're helping them with internal reuse and external recirculation when they're done with those items internally, or if it's a small business here in Chicago or in the Bay Area or wherever they might inbound to our platform, who are looking to find some chairs at a discounted rate and not have to buy them net new. They want to be able to reuse something that's already been purchased prior. We vet every single organization and we know everyone who's there. And in a lot of cases, we're integrated with their internal software. So really everyone on Rheaply is a real business, is a real company, and we have relationships with them. And I think that's just I think one of the things that part of our mission is building a community. Those are the first few words. It's building a community where workplace resources can find their next use. So the community part is super important to us, and we kind of take that very seriously. So not only do we vet, but we also try to educate. We also know that a lot of organizations, especially the bigger companies, tens of thousands, they have employees who actually want to be way more involved in the sustainability mission and goals and strategy of the company, but they're unsure of how do I do this or what do I do? And so we just started offering for free to our companies, things like Carbon 101 training. Mm-hmm. So we have a couple of experts on our team who would just do a webinar and say, hi, do you want to know about scope 1, 2, and 3? And what does that actually mean? And when you're not at work, how can you practically be thinking about that at home? Yeah. What are some tools that have nothing to do with Rheaply that you can be using at home to be able to be living a more sustainable life? So we think of our community first with trust, for sure, and through vetting. But also there's these other added benefits of sharing what's working at your organization or the educational pieces that I just mentioned.
I think it's absolutely critical. You think in terms of community in order to enable a marketplace.
Right. Exactly.
Trust. And to your point.
Exactly.
This is a great place to take a quick commercial break. We're going to be right back. We're back to continue the conversation with Garry Cooper Jr., co-founder and CEO of Rheaply.com. And for those of you trying to type that in, that's RHEAPLY.com, Rheaply.com. Garry, you recently acquired a company called Materials Marketplace. How's that going to help you expand Rheaply's services to address new parts of North America? Because you're focused in the Chicago area now.
That's right. So a couple of ways. So the first main way is it just up levels us to an area that we hadn't been in before. So the Materials Marketplace, founded about 18 years ago, was founded to help businesses in states move surplus materials, mostly in the built environment, but they could also be post-consumer. They could also be things that are left over from a manufacturing process, and move them to another business within the same state where they could be used best, right? Because states have an interest in reducing tipping fees and having less landfills and creating more economic empowerment and having all that be in their current tax basis. Well, it turns out that worked. But what Rheaply's been doing is being more at the product level, right? So prior we were talking about a chair moving from one organization or chairs moving to another organization. But what happens when no one needs those chairs, right? So we currently have recyclers on our platform who'll break down those chairs into legs, into the seating, into the cushion. Okay, so then those become materials.
Right.
But then where does that material flow go? So really our answer is through the materials marketplace. So since the materials marketplace was really the best materials marketplace in the United States, it made sense given what we're doing at the product level to kind of harmonize that strategy. The other is they are deployed in geographies, again, mostly in states and counties. And we Rheaply are looking to go to 50 cities over the next, by mid-2024, and set up our reuse program with the Department of Environment or Department of Sustainability within that city or county to cause, again, B2B reuse, especially of built environment material. So when we thought about how they're deployed, how we're deployed, how they are about materials, we're about products, it really just kind of made sense to kind of work together. And then lastly, one of the co-founders actually of Materials Marketplace has been on our team for about a year and a half. And he leads our department, our ecosystem, which is really our demand side of our marketplace. So it just made sense from a personnel, kind of a thematic, obviously values aligned, and then just from a go-to-market side also made sense. And so we couldn't be happier. And we're excited to kind of get reuse into every single community in the United States.
Now, like I said, you're focused in Chicago, and you just described the efficiencies that are created in regional markets. But a lot of the companies we talk to in this space talk globally and shipping stuff halfway around the world. So I want to ask you, how big geographically speaking, does a circular market need to be efficient? And I guess the other side of that question is, how compact geographically yet?
And it's a great question. And I think there's kind of a high level answer to that, which is like, an economy that's like $1 trillion economy. I think Chicago's $1 trillion GDP economy, certainly has the makeups to have circularity within its own borders. But if you just look downstate to Rockford or to Peoria or even to Champaign-Urbana with U of I there, one might ask the question, is there enough motion and is there enough dynamicism in those local markets to actually create circularity within those local markets? So the kind of nifty thing that we've done at Rheaply is really think in the future, even today. So the way it works at Rheaply is a community is kind of digitally gated, but it's actually all on the same platform. And I say it this way: if one of your listeners was to go on the Rheaply's platform, especially if you're in San Francisco, you can actually log on for free. And you were to go into the exchange, you would see items that were just in San Francisco. If you go and click the radius button, you can change your radius from just being in the San Francisco market to being all California. Right. Or you can change your radius button to being all the United States. So what we're trying to do is force hyper-localization, but you can actually override that. And what the thing that we're trying to do is say, hey, first dibs should be as closest to you as possible. So if you got on a plane from San Francisco and dropped yourself in New York, the platform would reorder and you would see everything in New York. You wouldn't even see anything from San Francisco. So it isn't that these regional circular marketplaces aren't connected. They are all connected and they're all on the platform. We're just trying to give kind of first dibs and better connection to the people who are physically close to each other.
So really what we're talking about is not a circular economy, but a nested set of...
It's a nested group. Exactly right. Exactly right.
So are you enabling people to become acquirers of material and resources so that they can create their own business and sell through Rheaply?
That is actually our biggest dream. So our biggest dream is that, in 2.5 years, there are people creating storefronts on Rheaply's platform. This is the exact same way. You can actually do this functionality right now, like you would have at Shopify, which is, hey, I have, I'm a repairer, I'm a remanufacturer, or hey, I'm just a small business person who likes old couches or old doors or old tables, and I want to refashion them. Great. You can put them on the platform. You can take a link. You can put your own branding onto the platform, and you can host that link, and it's just your storefront. So you don't see all the other stuff from all of our other customers. People who use that link would just see the items that you're offering. So it does kind of have that Etsy or that kind of Shopify feel But then someone could kind of enter Rheaply's network, and in Rheaply's network, they would see all the items that are being shared between businesses in that local area, and then again, they can go and kind of expand the radius of where the algorithm is searching from. And then we have it also super private. So a lot of our organizations just want to start with internal reuse, especially if they're big organizations going through a transformation. So they might say, hey, Garry, we don't want to share our couches just yet. We just want to share with the external world. We just want to share them internally. So you can also lock it down so only the people you invite can also see these items. So we kind of have all that power in between.
So how do you benefit and make a profit when it's internally transferred? Is there a fee for facilitation?
There is. So the easiest way to think about Rheaply is in kind of two buckets. So the first bucket is we're a traditional SaaS company. So we will, under a SaaS license, allow an organization to use our software for internal reuse. The second bucket to think about Rheaply is a very traditional kind of marketplace or exchange platform. So in that platform, a person comes on to either buy or sell an item that they no longer, or even to donate an item, I should say, they no longer need. In that scenario, we take a transactions fee. So really, if you're only using Rheaply internal to get that internal savings, to get all the reporting that we talked about at the top, you would be kind of our SaaS customer. And a lot of our SaaS customers are also contributors to our marketplace because their items, when they can't use them anymore internally, flow into the marketplace. But to be a part of the marketplace, you don't have to have a SaaS license.
So thinking very broadly, there's a lot of other resources besides physical assets that business and government just have a lot of lying around. Network bandwidth, even human capacity. Like I could run, you have people to do human resources for you because we're not. So is Rheaply thinking about what else it can facilitate the transactions around?
Absolutely. So one of the big ones actually is that last thing you just mentioned, which is, free FTE time. So for instance, I'd say prior to the quarantine, one of the ways we've seen this is, especially in the universities that we partner with, is in like grant writing, CV or resume help, very technical, a surgery of a certain type of animal or a certain technique in a lab. You might know how to do that. I might be a new graduate student. Can you help me? And I might be a new graduate student at a different university than you are. Yeah. Can you help me with understanding that technique? So that's kind of where it was pre-quarantine. And then in the quarantine, of course, and even to today, we see a lot of stress on the healthcare system, right? You need more nurses, you need more doctors, you need more people administrating hospitals. But then there's a lot of folks who could actually do that from their home. They're retired nurses, they're retired doctors. So we do think that when we ask business leaders, what's your most important assets? Every single one of them first say humans, right? Humans are our most important assets. And then we say, what's the next important asset? Our assets, right? Our physical, our actual things that are on our balance sheet. So we know that we are trying to solve physical asset circularity, physical asset resourcefulness, but we do think that at one point in time, human capital as an asset could be a class that's made more circular, especially as you start to think about the upskilling and the reskilling that's going to be needed to actually really bring a circular economy to full fruition. People are going to need to know how to repair certain things or remanufacture certain things, and they shouldn't have to go to college. They shouldn't have to go get a master's or PhD to do so. They should be able to maybe learn it from an apprentice who's been doing it for 20, 30, 40 years. So we imagine all those kinds of things actually happening on our platform as well.
That's fascinating because what we're talking really is optimizing everything at that point, not just
exactly
stuff. And I think that really is the kind of comprehensive view we need to be taking of what we're about to do to our world.
Exactly. And that's the promise of having $600 billion of assets that are unused. You actually, it's not just getting them back into the economy, it's actually using them to bring about another economy, because that economy is going to have to move them. It's going to have to repair them. It's going to have to resell them. It's going to have to account for them. And we think in that there is a massive jobs program. And so when we go to cities, when we are talking to the States, we don't think of circularity just as a sustainability. Of course it is. We don't think of it as just like a cost savings. Of course it is. We think of it actually as a local jobs program. And that is, in some ways, is another tip of why we've made our platform hyper locally focused, even though everything is on the same platform. Because if you're going to have a transaction, you want someone who's going to locally, someone who's going to ship it locally. Mm-hmm. Well, then that's just a person someone just got a job and moving one thing from an organization to another, and then so forth and so on.
So what's your advice for an entrepreneur? And that could include an employee in a company thinking, how do I become more valuable to the company? What's your advice about picking an industry to introduce circular practices?
Yeah, so I think my advice, well, I say that anyone, either in the climate, in entrepreneurship, I think the hardest thing to do is to get started.
Yeah.
There's a lot of planning. You can have a lot of great decks, a lot of great memos. You can talk to a lot of brilliant people who've done so many incredible things. Turns out the hardest thing is actually starting someplace, because you got to make a decision. You got to have the trade-off. What am I going to be able to do? What can't I solve today? So I think one is starting. I keep a journal. So there are some things that I can't, quote, start tomorrow in our business, but I write about it. I continue to think about it. So even if starting doesn't have to be going in your business license, it could literally just be, I have an idea. I'm going to start on paper, sketching it out of how that might work. So that's one bit. The second bit, when I think about circularity, I really think about finding the materials that have definite waste streams. So if you look at U.S. The EPA actually maps all this data out. But if you look at all the waste streams, and you look at plastics, if you look at C&D, construction demolition material, built environment material, if you look at food, if you look at any of these categories, you see that they're massively. They take up 90. Those three take up 90% of our current waste streams in the United States. So if I were to start a circular business again, I would think, well, those would be material types that I would want to start to make circular, because they are definitely contributing to the overarching waste problem. Then I go look at, from a carbon perspective, what's the estimates of, if we were to reuse 10%, 50% of any one of those types of materials, what would be the carbon savings? Mm-hmm. And then I can start to isolate as an entrepreneur. Okay, here are material types that would both be a carbon win and a waste win. And then I go and ask, I think, the most important question: so what? Does anyone care about these assets? Do they have any kind of resale value or net new purchasing value? Are they gunked up in our global supply chain? So even if they're low value, it'd be good to have hyper local networks that you can find them. So if no one cares, no matter how passionate I am, the reality is, or we are, that no matter how much waste they could divert, how much carbon they could avoid, if no one cares about them, it's going to be hard to start a circular business in that field. That might be an extension of the work. So as I was saying before, we started in the lab space, right? So we started in the lab space. We have a mature business in the lab space. But it turns out, especially in COVID, no one wanted to reuse anything in the labs, right? Everyone's brand new, virgin. We don't want any germs. We don't want anything. Okay, so while there's a lot of carbon, a lot of waste in the labs, let's think about what's the next thing for us. So I think you have to be nimble enough. You have to build a tool that's nimble enough, or a program that can move to a material type that people actually care about in the time that the business is being kind of started.
So get a sense of where you are and what resources are available, then do the assessment of the business opportunity, then do the assessment of the market demand for the thing.
Yes. And I think the last thing I would say is it is one thing that we thought about late, because when we looked at the problem that Rheaply solved and talked to a lot of customers before we launched the company, prospective customers, we said the biggest problem is visibility. We don't know where things are. It's not organized. So we first have to solve visibility, then transactability. How do businesses to business exchange things at scale, like financially? So we said, okay, visibility and exchange. And then, but in the back of our mind, obviously logistics was also something we needed to solve. But we thought, with all the logistics solutions in the market, that problem wasn't the same size of visibility and exchange. So I would go also and think of, why aren't people doing this today? We always go in and say people have good intent. So if it's so easy to reuse and it makes so sense, it's way better than recycling, why aren't people doing reuse? Mm-hmm. So I think one has to also ask the question, why isn't your solution available today? Or why aren't people doing something like it today? And hidden in that is a monster of a problem that you have to solve. And so I would try to find what that monster is.
You know, I mean, we could have another half-hour conversation just about this topic. So I hope you'll come back and talk with us again. But how can folks learn more about Rheaply and get started on the platform?
Yes. So learn more about Rheaply. You can go to Rheaply, RHEAPLY.com. At Rheaply, we have a resource library where we publish not only our works, but we highlight other people who are writing and thinking and talking about circularity, about reuse and recycling. So it's not just about us, it's about people that we actually look up to and we learn from. So it's all literally all free. So just go to Rheaply.com. You can even go past our nice designs on our homepage and just go to the resource library. Beyond that, I write a monthly newsletter on LinkedIn called The Sustainable Business. And it's just chronicling different topics that come up to some of the chief sustainability officers that I speak to all the time. I write about it. It has about 60,000 subscribers. It also is free. And we just love for people to fill out comments and challenge the thinking or things that you're working through, because I think we don't get anywhere unless we all have honest conversations. So really, so either one of those two things, you can find more about Rheaply and kind of what's up today.
Well, Garry, thank you very much for taking time to talk with us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Go reuse.
We've been speaking with Garry Cooper Jr. He's the co-founder and CEO of Rheaply.com. And again, that's spelled RHEAPLY, Rheaply.com. It's a resource reuse marketplace for business, government, and large institutions that, as we heard, aims to create regional circular economies for the surplus stuff and resources lying fallow in organizations. I think the most important point to take away from this conversation is the immense value that can be activated to reduce waste. $600 billion of stuff just lying around is a lot of value to mine. If a company has 30,000 Herman Miller chairs and instead of paying for them to be sent to a landfill could instead earn, say, $3 million by selling them for $100 each, which is way below the list price, there's a lot of new revenue available to create the human and logistics infrastructure that is necessary for a circular economy to evolve and without incurring extra costs. The value that will drive the circular economy is already available. It just needs to be activated. Circular economies will also create and keep value within regions while supporting improved global efficiency. The other key point today is the need to profile the resources available to us. Not just the natural resources that have been increasingly measured by science, but also measuring the built and human resources that make up our economy. Doing life cycle analyses of products, inventorying unused resources that could be resold, including even potentially people's time, as Garry explained, will make the value of hiring and keeping talented people even more self-evident to organizations in the midst of the radical changes that have reshaped business and government work styles during the pandemic. Garry put it this way when we were talking off-air. Rheaply wants to be the Google Maps of the business world. And I take that to mean that they need to profile everything we use. And wouldn't it be an amazingly efficient world if we actually understood it the way we're beginning to understand nature? So check it out. Go take a look at Rheaply and see whether or not you, as an employee within a company, looking at a lot of unused resources, could create value. Maybe you could even start a business. What happened on Etsy and on eBay that has enabled a vibrant local or artisanal economy could happen in every aspect of our lives. I hope to take a few minutes to share this podcast and all the others that we've done, more than 250 now, with your friends, family, neighbors, and coworkers. You all are the amplifiers that spread the ideas that we collect here on sustainability in your ear. So please let folks know that you can find the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, and other fine purveyors of podcast goodness. We appreciate your support. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. We'll be back with another Innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.